Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenge on the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, community advocate Gema Sotomayor, and we're just the two of us. We're online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as at Don Eduardo Barca on Instagram. And please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications. Share your favorite episode where we found this episode. Thank you. All right. As you can see, Andy Lipson is not with us. It's just Gema and myself. And I'm here, I'm reporting from Bogota, Colombia. And you are where right now? Because I know you moved, Gema.
Still in San Francisco, though. So San Francisco.
Great. Good. So then I can still, when I come back, I'll see you. All right. So today's topic. So I had an idea since this week was a little bit, we had to move things around because of schedule. So the topic of today will be how you, as a co-host to What's Left, we haven't actually heard your political, well, we have heard your political journey, but what we have in common out of everyone, out of all the hosts and all the guests, is that you and I have very similar background in being raised in two countries, two cultures, except you're from Nicaragua, I'm from Mexico. And so how did that, the culture, being raised in two countries, having to study in the USA, having those dualities, how did that affect us politically, right? How did it shape our way of thinking? How did it shape the way we are today? Yeah. So I think that we can share our story, and this will be a fun episode for people who want to stray away from theoretical and from current events to a more personable episode today. I think that will be fun. Yeah?
Sound good?
I'm good. All right. So I would like, who would you like, for me or for you to start?
I actually have a question because I think you know more of my background than I know of yours, of your upbringing. But would you say that you grew up in a politically active household?
No. My parents were not political. I think a lot of things are political, to be honest. You know, the fact that my dad wasn't very machista. How would I translate machista for our English-only audience? I think like...
Mrs. Chauvinist, something like that. I don't know the exact something around
I didn't grow up with a traditional machista father. Like my dad wasn't no le paraba bolas. So he wasn't very, he wasn't put a lot of emphasis on whether I played with dolls or male toys, like boy toys, right? So I had a doll, I had a shark, and the shark ate the Barbie always. I don't think it was a Barbie. It was some kind of doll from Mexico. It wasn't a Barbie. It was one of those piratas.
Plastic, and the color was not quite peachy. It was a little bit off. Yeah.
Yeah. So if, I guess I will start with myself, and then we can go back and forth to see how comparison. So my dad wasn't very. So I think the only thing that was kind of rad or maybe different from growing up in a Latino household is, there's a Latino household is normally Catholic and conservative views. And my dad didn't have an issue with me singing Gloria Trevi in the living room and shaking my hair, or singing Jose Jose, which was, with a beer, a corona in his hand, and we sing to that, karaoke to that. Or if I played with a doll and the shark, like I said, or if I wanted to feel tall, so I used my mother's high heels. But I wasn't attracted to wearing high heels. I feel how I felt. So I think it's the only thing that I could think of that is like little, maybe I'll just use the word progressive for lack of a better word. And so, other than that, my parents weren't very political in the sense of like what we discuss here, like discussing things and how it relates to a more political movement or a protesting. They weren't anything like that. But nonetheless, I think a lot of the things, my lived experiences, did shape the way I think I am today, right? For example, I grew up with two parents until I was the age of 10 years old. And these parents, unlike other Mexican parents, allowed me to call them by their first name. My parents also, my mother gave me her last name, and my brother has my father's last name. Now I go by both, Sanchez Abarca. And the other thing too is that I was allowed to voice my opinions. I was allowed to stand on top of the dining room table and pretend it was a platform and talk however I wanted and express myself, which allowed then for future security in myself, like the confidence I had in myself to say what I think, what I feel, which sometimes, a lot of the times, kids grow up in Latin households and they're told, cállate, te están hablando los adultos, quiet, the adults are speaking. And that I see that even here in Colombia where I'm at. And I don't believe in that because I didn't grow up that way. So what I am appreciative about is that I had that ability to be able to speak my mind and to say how I feel. And the other thing too is my mother was a devout Jehovah's Witness, and my father was a sort of creyente believer in the Catholic Church, but didn't really attend. Excuse me, didn't attend the church, the misa, the mass, and so give me a chance here because I'm living in Colombia, so a lot of times I'm forgetting
No,
some of
and
the
this
words.
might be interesting because I nod my head because I can understand exactly what you mean
Right.
without
But we're
realizing.
speaking to
Wait,
an
you need to say
English.
it in English. Yeah,
Right,
so
right,
you
right, right. So
interesting.
just help me out a bit.
Yeah. Well, I
And
don't think I'd be much help is what I'm saying, because for me, it just sounds like you're speaking normally.
right, right. But I'm having worked as an interpreter recently, but as an interpreter, I have to constantly think and think and think about audiences. So anyhow, so my dad didn't go to mass, and so that was radical also in itself. That my father was just like, oh, let's read National Geographic. I'm going to subscribe you to National Geographic, and I had my bookcase filled with National Geographic and had a telescope at home. It was contrary to, I think it was despite my mother, really. Sometimes I think that's what the reason was for. I don't think it was my dad. My dad loved science and he would read National Geographic at the toilet, but I think he did it a lot because there was a lot of conflict between my mother and my father. So growing up in a divided household like that just gave me the space to think for myself. Uh, and then here's the tricky part. Studying in the USA in San Francisco, 6 months of the year, and then the other 6 months in Mexico. So back and forth. And then later on learning in middle school or, middle school, la escuela intermedia, that wasn't the case for a lot of Latino families, because a lot of them, I can speak about my country, like people, middle class or wealthy Mexicans stay in my country, and the poor Mexicans always go to the USA. So they go by land, and so they don't have documents. Unlike, I think, Nicaraguenses, my belief is I've seen a lot of professionals because of the situation in Nicaragua. Even they will come over to the
Yeah.
USA.
And then the Reagan administration also giving part into because of the Contra. So there's some history there. But quick question, just out of curiosity: 6 months Mexico, 6 months United States. Did the school year align with the school year in the United
No,
States? Or no. Okay, so you okay.
no, though it was always awful because I would come into, let's say, fifth grade. This was always happening to me. I'd come into fifth grade sometime in October, so I would miss out, because school would begin sometime late August, or the 16th of August, sometimes around that, like the second week of August,
Yeah.
and I'd come in October. So I'd leave for 3 months. I'd leave in December, come back, and like I'd come back in March, or I'd leave in May instead of June. And then these were always troubling things. Like I'd leave from May to October, and then I would leave for a few months during the winter break, because I had to be between two households, between my dad's family and my mother's family. And I hated coming to school. I remember I went to Junipero Acero Elementary School in San Francisco, and
Mhm.
I distinctly remember it was October because the festivities for Halloween were happening. And I remember coming in from Mexico
Dia de
to
los
fifth
Muertos.
grade. I came to fifth grade in October. Everybody had already made friends, and I felt so lost, and then having to leave again in December. It was so discombobulating, is the way I think I would describe it, because I felt like I was in vacation in the USA, and then I felt like I was home, and then it felt people always saw it the other way around. Oh, my teachers would say, you're going to vacation too often. And I was like, I don't think I'm in, I think I'm on vacation here in the USA. That's how it felt like to me. But to a teacher, like, you, for me, it was like you're on vacation too long. And I felt like I was home back in Amacuzac, Morelos, or in La Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City, or if I was with my family, in those two places in Guerrero, because my mother's side is from Guerrero, my father's side is from Mexico City. So for me, it felt I was in vacation in the USA. Later on, I learned how to adapt in my head, how to make out that I'm actually both areas. And sometimes I would stay longer. It wasn't always perfectly 6 months. Like, I don't want people to think it was just perfectly 6 months. Sometimes I would overstay my time in Mexico. Sometimes I would overstay my time in the USA. Sometimes it would be more than 6 months. It'd be 8 months in the USA. So I just go for a few months in Mexico, depending on the years.
Did you have, like, was it that your mom was here and your dad was there, and that's why you were splitting it that way, or who were you
Yeah,
staying
both
with?
my parents are U.S. American citizens
I know, but
because of
who are you staying with in Mexico, and who are you staying
my
with here?
grandmother's family. My grandmother's family. So it was a fight that my dad had to. My dad really was like, okay, well, if I'm not going to see my kids, I want them to be with at least with my side of the family, and my mother also, like, at that time too, because my mother divorced. I think I was being a difficult child because of she was dating, and I had a hard time as the oldest child seeing all that. So I just didn't want to be around. I remember one time my mother went to Hawaii and she had gone with her fiance, and I was really angry and upset, and I couldn't stand being around my newly wed stepfather. So my mom sent me to Mexico. I just couldn't deal with it. And so sometimes it was because of that. It wasn't always because of my father. So it was hard. It was hard. But sometimes yeah, that's how it was. And I think the hardest thing, I don't want to go too much into my own life. I want to go into your life as well, Gemma. I'm going to give you a chance. I don't want to take over the whole time. I think the challenging part was this dual citizenship, this dual life. I learned English. I mean, I went to school. I went to elementary school in San Francisco, but there's a lot of Latinos in San Francisco. At that time, there were more, and then I think there are now. So I didn't have to learn English. I just spoke to my compañeros, my classmates in Spanish, and I speak Spanish at home. And I mean, people. I also went to a bilingual school. So just like my nephew, people get amazed when my nephew visits Mexico. They're like, he was born in the USA, and how does he not speak English? Well, because we speak to him in Spanish at home, and he goes to a bilingual biliteracy program school where 70-80% of the education is taught in Spanish, and they get a little bit of English at the end of the day, which is like 30 minutes. So obviously it's not impactful enough. Now that he's in third grade, it's 50-50. It's in half English, half Spanish. And then next year, he's 9 years old. And then next year, he'll have 80% English. So, I mean, it's normal. It depends how you grew up in the USA. Some kids don't ever speak English until, depending on your family, it depends and who you surround yourself with. If you have older siblings and they speak English, like in the case of my brother, when he speaks, he has a very strong Chicano accent. When he speaks in Spanish, he has an accent in both, in English and Spanish, but you can hear his Chicano accent in both English and Spanish. And that's because I made a conscious decision at age 11, after being bullied for so long for being a wetback, and for even though I never crossed the river,
Yeah.
but for I mean, like being called things in the USA and having an accent and everything, I decided I wouldn't speak any more Spanish. So I made a conscious decision at 11 years old that I would just speak English. And then at 13, I was having difficulties still because I was being bullied for it. Then I told my brother, I said to my brother, from this day forward, desde ahora en adelante, you will not talk to me in Spanish, and which affected him. He was just 10 years old. So having an older brother, I spoke to him just in English, and then he spoke just English. So today I have the better world of best of both worlds, and he has more English. He identifies more. He's more fluent in English because I'm older, and so I influenced him. For him, he had a difficult time. When I remember he was at 10 years old, he barely spoke English, and I forced him to speak English with me because I was bullied in middle school. So I just wanted to, that's how I perfected. I would practice and practice and practice in front of a mirror and watch television and films and everything, try to speak perfect English. Anyhow, but we're going off course. The point is that I think it was just the challenge of trying to deal with two identities. Going to Mexico, I remember being 11 or 10, I forget, and playing football, with my cousins in a barrio, in a very urban neighborhood. And I remember the parents around there, I think my aunts were saying, because I think I was winning, I don't remember. And I remember hearing, he's like, no dejen que ese gringuito los vaya a ganar. Don't let that gringuito win you. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I mean, I didn't curse at that age, but I was like, what? I was looking around, where's the gringo? Because I'm like, who's the gringo here? Because I'm Mexican, and then I realized when they were all the kids were trying to beat me, in football, soccer in the USA. I realized at that point, I started crying because I was like, well, why are they doing that? I'm Mexican myself. I didn't come here with a little US American flag trying to identify myself as a gringuito because I never thought of myself that way. I just happened to have parents that are US American, given amnesty in the 80s, and I was given that citizenship. Like, I have dual citizenship. Like, I didn't think of myself any better than anybody else. So in the USA, I felt like I'm not accepted. And in Mexico, I didn't feel that. I feel like that's how we identify, you and I.
Yeah, definitely. So there's some similarities and there's some differences. I'll start off with I was born in the United States and my parents lived in the United States. They were together at the time, but they were having a rough time when I was born. So my grandma, who came to help my mom raise me, said, "You guys need to figure your shit out. I'm taking her to Nicaragua." And both parents agreed. So it wasn't they were in between, and it wasn't a we want of both worlds. It was strictly a my parents were at each other's throats. They had my two older brothers. There's big age differences. So it just made more sense for them financially and I think also in the relationship that my grandma raised me in Nicaragua. So my life in my life in Nicaragua was strong, even though Nicaragua is also male dominated, men tend because it's a Latin country, it tends to be
Right.
more male dominant.
Of
Our
course.
family was not. Our family was definitely about the women. My grandma was the one that called the shots. It didn't matter. Her sons were grown, married with children of their own, and my grandma would still beat them if they did something that she didn't approve of.
Mm,
When my grandma passed away, the eldest daughter took over in matriarchy, and everyone in the family would kind of come to her for advice and just let her know what kind of decisions. And that's the woman that I grew up with. So
mm,
I
mm,
grew up with the matriarch of the family. She was never married, never had kids. She was very financially well off and high ranking in her job.
mm,
So what that meant for me was I was raised by a strong woman who people respected
mm,
and took her opinion seriously. And that's kind of the upbringing that I had. I had the upbringing of strong women who call the shots and people respect.
mm.
Similarly to you, when we would be in circles and people would be conversing, the adults would be conversing, they would allow me space to speak at a very young age. Like I was probably like 9 or 10, and I was able to voice my ideas, and it was never a similarly, "You're young, you don't know what you're talking about." It was very much a, "Okay, yeah," and would ask me questions, would want me to kinda develop those ideas and expand on them and really consider them.
You do know though, right? Like, about the Latino thing to shush children because the adults are
Yeah.
speaking.
No, yeah, that's what I was saying. They never did that. They did that to my other siblings.
Hmm.
I was the only child allowed at the table. All my other siblings were not allowed at the table. All or the table not meaning a literal table, but meaning a circle of conversation. All the other childrens were like expected to go and play. And not to say that I couldn't play, but it
Hmm.
was at some point, even if I was outside playing, they would make it a point to call me in to be part of the conversation. So my family was even I don't know that it was methodically planned out, but I do believe that there was some consciousness in the idea of Gema needs to be here, Gema needs to be able to speak, Gema needs to be able to develop her own ideas and express herself. And it was
Yeah.
something that was specifically done with me. I am aware that that's not something, again, equitable. It wasn't done across my other siblings or
Yeah.
cousins. A background on my family of why this was a big deal is I that was Nicaragua in the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
early 2000s. We're talking post the socialist revolution of Sandinistas.
Yeah.
And my family were Sandinistas. My family they fought. There's two of my uncles were, oh, why am I getting balloons? Did you see balloons on my computer? I don't know. I don't know where that came from. We
How
need to
did
edit.
that happen?
There's a
Do it
ghost in the
again.
house. Oh, it's text message? Someone text me. Can you, okay. Can you turn off my phone, please, so I don't get
Oh.
someone text message balloons? Okay, so we'll edit that part out. Just turn it off, yeah.
Yeah, because
So no. Okay, so the huh? ¿Qué pasó? It doesn't matter. I'm still gonna get it.
So this type through that messages.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully no more balloons. So two of my uncles were part of the revolution. They fought in the revolution, and one of them made a military career. He became very wealthy, very well connected, and he kind of propelled the rest of the family to the next social scale because of his connections and his success. Now, I was not alive during times of war, but I do know based off of the stories that my mom tells me, my grandma was the type of person that it didn't matter if you were Sandinista or if you were Somocista. If you knocked on her door and asked for food and water, she would give it to you. And it was never because of the fear that they would label you or they would retaliate or they would do something. According to my mom, my grandma would always say, if that was my child, I would want another person to feed and to house them or to give them what they needed to aid them. So my grandma was very of that mindset, and my mom is very of that mindset too. The rest of my family is not, but my mom really took that from my grandma. The holistic, the helping people just for the sake of being a person, not for the sake of do you agree politically or not. So growing up, I was growing up listening to Sandinista songs, to revolutionary musicians. Like this was the thing. We would, when there were las marchas, the parades or the celebrations, we were there. And it wasn't we were there because you just wanted to be a part of the party. It was you were there because you believed in the ideology. Your family fought in it. They risked their lives. So you're there. This is your upbringing. So I had a very political, socialist, communist upbringing. And then I also had a very strong female family-led, you call the shots upbringing. So it was very, very opposite to what the common is, right? That's very rare. And because my parents were in the United States and I was being raised by my extended family, my aunts and uncles, it was you have to go back and forth. But unlike you, that you were going like splitting your years, I was going for years. So I would be doing 5 years or 3 years and then being sent back. So it was, it was tough being young because people were telling me, this is your mom. And I'm like, okay. I don't know. But as I grew older, I kind of fell into it and understood. Similarly to you, when I was in the United States, I was a foreigner, even though I was born in the United States. And then when I was in Nicaragua, I was a foreigner because I spoke English and I didn't look Nicaraguan. It's the exact same thing. I didn't fit in either one. But in hindsight and hearing you speak, Eduardo, I also think that it wasn't because our accent necessarily, because there was people here with accents too. I didn't actually have an accent. I don't really have a strong accent in speaking in English, and I don't have
But
a
you
strong,
have an accent. I'm sorry, you do.
but it's not strong. You can't pinpoint where it's from.
Yeah.
Similarly in
I mean,
Nicaragua,
you don't speak like a valley white girl. I've been around white people, and they're like, "Oh my God, there's so much happening." Blah, blah, blah. Like you don't speak like that.
yeah,
You
but
you
that's
speak
very,
Latina, but
but that's
you know,
very narrow. because it depends on what state you're in, depends on what
Yeah,
city,
that's true.
depends on how they're gonna speak. So, you know, and in Nicaragua, I don't have at like maybe the first couple of days that I'm in Nicaragua, I do have an accent, but I
Yeah.
quickly bring the Nicaraguense out. Like I quickly like just I'm
Uh-huh.
an
No, I know. I've been there.
I would argue, Eduardo, that the reason why we feel as outcasts is because of our upbringing, because of the way that we were raised and the way that we carry ourselves is not the norm to see people at our age or our background carry themselves the way that we do. That's why I think, and people don't know to call that out or pinpoint that there's a difference. So they assume that, oh, I just don't recognize them because they're immigrants. They're clearly immigrants, when that's not necessarily the case. It's rather our background makes our personality and the way that we express ourselves and communicate much different than theirs.
Yeah. I mean, what I relate with you because when I was in the USA, there weren't many Latinos who were going back and forth to their countries on a plane. You know what I mean? With their
The
parents.
privilege. Yeah.
Sometimes some parents were sending their kids on the plane on their own or with some guardian. But I mean, with our families, you know, having that, I'll just say, for lack of a better word, as for people to understand convention, with the privilege of being able to fly back and forth with your family, you know, that doesn't, you know, that means that you are of a certain rank, you are a certain class, and that makes us middle class, you know. And so, you know, the fact that I could study, go back home and do that, you know, that makes us different. And it was difficult because I couldn't. There were kids who grew up with very, very, very Latino, didn't even speak English, kind of Latino parents, but then they didn't speak very good Spanish. You know, they didn't speak fluently. I remember, I'm like, how do you not speak fluently? Your parents don't even speak English. But because they
Lack
associated,
of education too.
right. And then, you know, and then there was the other Latinos that were recently uh, newcomers. And then they didn't even speak English at all. You know, they came in at 16, they came in at 17. I didn't feel like I could relate with them either, you know. So that's why I'm saying with you, I do feel that connection with you. And I've found myself around some other Latinos like that have a similar background experience. In your case, years, and then other years. In my case, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Anyhow, but you did have a very politically your background did shape you politically. I think mine shaped me in the sense that it was religion and it was science that kind of like the clash of one another. My parents were like that. That's the thing where I had to get out of religion in order to find myself. But I'm glad you're saying that you did have politically backed childhood.
And that's what's caused the most issues with me and becoming quote unquote American. It's not so much the privilege, quote unquote, and I hate that word, but it's just like,
I can't think of another word right now, and I'm not.
yeah, and it's also, I think, something that when the audience hears that, it automatically gets them to see something which is similar to what we're trying to say.
Yeah,
But the first world problems, right? That a lot of people in the United States have. And it's not to say that there isn't poverty, there isn't extreme hunger, there isn't a homeless problem in middle America, not just the main cities, which is what, you know, most of the government and the news wants to focus on. There is a big problem, but in at least in Nicaragua, and I'm assuming similarly in Mexico that you probably experienced, it was people couldn't buy crackers, people couldn't buy milk, people couldn't buy eggs, people couldn't buy rice and beans, stapled food. People didn't have any shoes. Children were, I don't know.
it's
I
your
don't know.
fault.
I know. I don't know. My phone's agreeing.
Crackers.
It's agreeing with me. um,
Go ahead. Yeah.
But so people had real problems to worry about. You know, children were out on the streets asking for money, peddling, because they really had to. This whole notion that people say, oh, when I was your age, I walked 5 miles in the snow barefoot to get to school. That is reality for a lot of people in our countries, that they are walking to school under the rain, that they don't have transportation, they don't have well-fitting shoes or even uniforms or even pieces of papers to write things down with. So it's the struggle, I think, and maybe because it's in your face, makes it more real, to where here in the United States, people get upset and they voice their upsetness in social medias. They start hashtags, but it's nothing like it was, back in the days where we would say in the LA, what was it for Rodney King?
The LA riots.
The LA riots. I think it's me when I do my thumb. I need to stop talking with my hands. In Nicaragua, if you're raising the bus fare by 50 cents, which is less than a penny, people were rioting. People were setting buses on fire. People were going because they don't have that kind of money. And you are really threatening their livelihood. It's the same thing with the price of food. So even after the Sandinistas, Nicaragua was still very much heavily active in politically and in protest. So for me, that was my upbringing. That was what I was seeing, right? And I was coming here to the United States and seeing people struggling similarly, but doing nothing, really just kind of sucking it up, just really kind of seeing it. We need to struggle, we need to hustle it harder, we need to get another job, not really seeing there's something wrong with the system. There's something that we need to do. We need to push back. That wasn't it. So for me, it was also a struggle to see that disparity and to see the difference in how people reacted, and coming to terms with, well, what do I feel is the right reaction? What do I feel is the appropriate way to navigate those issues?
Yeah. I think my exposure personally to what I think became political for me was seeing going to Chiapas and seeing indigenous people dressing up and selling Subcomandante Marcos Dos, for the Zapatistas. And then the road trips in Mexico, seeing the disparities. I didn't have, my family's not rich. My family's just, here's the wealthy, here are the poor, and then here are the middle class. I'm like very low middle class. So they didn't experience poverty per se. Maybe there was, someone that had a very large bill for a medical thing that they had to get, so we had to spend money for that. But I didn't starve, or I didn't have any of family members that I can think of that have ever suffered that way in Mexico. Although I know it exists. I know people, because I've seen it in my country and other Latin American countries, like here in Colombia. But my political experiences were shaped by just seeing the disparities. At that time, well, I forget what years, but I remember the richest man in the whole world was a Mexican, Carlos Slim, for 3 years. And so you have a lot of people in the US, in Mexico, who are very rich, and then you have very, very large gap between the rich and the poor. And I just thought that is injustice, that's wrong. Why is that happening? And I didn't understand it. And that's what led me to start thinking about, well, what can we do about it, right? Why is this happening? And so when I was raised a Jehovah's Witness, preaching and teaching how to read the Bible wasn't enough for me. So I had to learn how to use my compassion for more. How do I belong somewhere? And that's how I started protesting. And then I remember the very first time in the USA, 9/11 happened in the USA when I was about 14, 2003, I believe. 2003 was when the anti-war movement happened and people went out to the streets. So I joined because
2001 was the terrorist. Yeah.
yes, and then in 2003 was when they went after Afghanistan. No, Iraq, which had nothing to do with Afghanistan. It was just that people found the connection. Weapons of mass destruction. So I had to go. I had this sense, like I didn't know what I was doing. I just felt stupid. I just went because I knew it was wrong. And so that was my exposure, and it was everywhere. It was in Mexico. It was in San Francisco. It was in France, in Paris. Everybody was out on the streets during that time. In England, London, everyone. So I remember reading about that. And I saw that Mexico City and San Francisco and New York, and I saw crowds in newspapers. And I don't know if anyone, people don't see, but on Yahoo News, I remember when I pull up the computer, I saw Yahoo News, and I'd see massive people, and we'd log in for emails in computer class at John O'Connell High School. I remember just seeing that. So lots of cities around the world were anti-war against the war in Iraq. So I think for me, that's what I thought. Oh, that's where I need to go. That's what I need to do. And maybe this is the way. Because the disparities. What do I do with it? I keep seeing it in my home country, and then I went to vacation in Guatemala, and I saw it there. We went to Antigua, we went to Tikal, and I saw it there. I saw it there as well. And then, in Europe, I went to Europe at 15. And then I also I thought Paris was so beautiful. Everybody talked about Paris in postcards. And I saw Paris, the real Paris. I'm like, oh my God, a lot of poverty here as well. People
Yeah.
living in the suburbs, like Aulnay-sous-Bois, which is the outskirts of Paris. So, it's just, to me, it happened where, thanks to my broad experiences, having to travel, because of my mother, she was married to a Jewish Mexican who she just felt like she was trapped in that marriage. So she would use the money and we'd go abroad. And so I, I just go and see these things. So I don't think my parents tried to intentionally upraise me politically, but living experiences, seeing things for myself, having this social justice thing. I hate using that word. Having this desire for righteousness, for things to be right in the world, allowed me to see the world differently, and seeing how the world is really not as pretty as people had made it out to seem. You know,
Yeah, and I think that that's where we differ with a lot with some of our peers in the community. I'm not to say that a lot of the organizers are don't have good intentions. I do believe they have good intentions, but in practicality and seeing how would you go about making change, you're not gonna cause change by talking about it or posting on it in social media necessarily. There has to be a physical action. And this goes back to the conversation that I was going with Lipson about, saying, yeah, no, they're cowards. You have to be willing to risk your skin. You're gonna have to put that out there. I don't see it happening any other way historically. And again, just for me, growing up and seeing people not letting anything pass here in the United States, I feel that people's threshold for the amount of bullshit that they're willing to stand is infinite. It has no end. And you have to give it also to the system, because they do it little by little. They start adding, one toothpick, then they add one on top, and then they add another one, and it's just a little. And you're just, okay. You haven't realized how much has been stacked against you until you're up against the wall without being able to breathe. And then it's too late. You can't move. You don't know what to do. And I feel that in my upbringing in Nicaragua and in the conversations within my family and the circle of friends of my family, it was, no, one toothpick is too much, and people would say, that's crazy. You guys were wilding out. And you guys were just starting destruction. And I also think that that's been some of the arguments that have been made in the United States. These bad apples that are going and just burning things and trying to be mischievous or just trying to destroy for the purpose of destroying. It's not that big of a deal. It's no, if you let them put one over you, you're going to let them pull 2, 3, 10 hundreds over you. You have to draw a line somewhere. And if that's where your line is, then that's where your line is, right? But it's been difficult, and personally, this is why I don't get involved in a lot of the political organizations in the city. I see things differently. I'm more of taking action. I'm more of, no, you don't put up with anything. You don't, because again, that was my upbringing. That was the background that I had. And I know it's daunting to a lot of people. And I am aware that the only reason why I'm so strong in this opinion is because we had a successful revolution. I mean, our president is now a dictator. It's been corrupted, the movement, it's not what it was, but it was successful. Was it successful at the first try? No, it wasn't. It took a couple of tries, but we did have a successful revolution. So it might be coming from that people just don't see it, because there hasn't been a successful revolution in the United States since what, the Civil War? And even then, you know, I don't know, but I know that it's not going to be done it's not going to be done by voting. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, because we're in the election season.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm thinking about a way to conclude here. One thing I appreciate about being Latino, about growing up in Latin America, is how real our revolutions, our movements are, our people are. Whereas I feel a lot of times university students have this theoretical side of themselves to say that they are Marxists or socialists, and they haven't really lived or experienced things. So it's not like I myself have experienced poverty, but to see my own country and my own identify myself with my own people, seeing how they have had to struggle, and I was too young to even go down south and participate part of the Zapatista movement or something like that. I don't know if I would have participated if I had grown up in that state of my country. But seeing how there is a violence, like there's narcotraficantes, there's drug trafficking in certain parts of Mexico. There are communities that combat that with arms. You know, they don't trust the police, but they also don't trust the gangs or the drug traffickers. And seeing people of my own community do something and not just depend on the government, which is collective organizing. They don't call it that way, but you know that's what they do. Seeing
Yeah.
this away from university theoretical ideas of what they think they should organize in the USA, give us the strength and the kind of the realness that we bring to communities in the USA, where we're like, hold up, don't fetishize Cuba or don't fetishize Venezuela, please. There's not socialism as the way you think it is,
Correct.
you know, and and this whole idea of organizing and collectiveness has always been done by our communities, you know. Not I don't want to undermine real community organizing that people have done, grassroots organizing, but sometimes I feel on the left, for example, progressive leftists sometimes idealize or idolize two different things. Certain socialist countries, and they want to act socialist, and you know, it really does take something. It takes grit. It takes, you know, strong, being strong-skinned, and to really find yourself in situations like yourself in Nicaragua recently, and like many of my experiences down south through Central America, through Mexico, and even here in Colombia, seeing things firsthand, you know, and that to me is what I think allows us or has shaped us politically, and not to buy into, and more so you, I think I've seen this a lot in you, from the beginning, like not to buy into, um, you know, the leftist sort of progressiveness of San Francisco that can sweep people to idealize certain ideals of how they're about community and organizing and all that, you know. So uh, sometimes I have been swept away by voting, to be honest, and I want to say that here because I think people during this election season, I still have thoughts about voting locally, but for general elections, for federal elections and national, like for the presidency, these things I have talked about this in other episodes. I've long been um, desanimado, discouraged from having to trust something bigger than what we know that won't affect us personally. We have to start from here, just like in our own communities back home. So maybe hold on, I need to edit here. Maybe we can find somewhere where you might identify with that, or you say something differently, Gema.
No, I agree with that. I'm I wouldn't see things the way that I see it if I hadn't had the upbringing that I had, if I wasn't allowed the space to do critical thinking. And that's the difference. People go to college to be told how to think without given the tools to conduct their own critical thinking. And even if you try to learn it, it's something that I think that that your brain just needs to do that naturally. So it forces you to have to start at a young age, which is what I had, which is why I think that I haven't been able to get swept up by it. It's because of the critical thinking, because I was raised to question and to really think about it, to not just take it at face value, right? But no, I I agree with your sentiment, Eduardo. I do. And I'm not idolizing the way that I grew up either. It was very tough. There are things that you sacrifice to have this. I think you would as well, Eduardo, because you were going back and forth. There is a little bit of instability that goes on to that, and there also is some secuelas of how we process emotionally or mentally certain situations. For example, your mom just getting up and going would have had an impact on you regardless whether you think it of it or not. I know that I know that I lost in some items by having this life that I had in the duality and being giving the chance to be politically adjacent. At the time I wasn't active, I was just politically adjacent. But it is important to I I don't know. I'm trying to think of how would I want people to how could people get something like that in the United States, because here we are seeing our experience and saying what we learned from it and how it helped us, but how do you translate that to something that people can do? How do you spread that opportunity? Because that's the whole point. The whole point is for people to be able to think this way and have these kinds of experiences. And that's where it gets hard in the United States, right? Because it's not just a Latin American thing, Eduardo. I actually think that a lot of people, like even in Europe, have similar ways of us thinking and revolutionary thought.
Right. I don't mean to say people don't have those. I'm not European, so
Yeah.
I can't speak to that. So for anyone who's listening, I don't want you to think that I just think it's a Latin American thing. I'm sure in your communities, wherever you are, even Native Americans in the USA, even rural areas in the USA, I'm sure I can't speak to that because I'm not that. I'm speaking as a Latin.
Yeah. No, but
I
I've
don't want
spoken with some Irish, very politically active Irish.
Did you? You want to be Irish now?
No, I'm just saying. I found it very fascinating. And he knew so much about my history too, like just my country's history, which is it was great because you rarely find someone that can, one, point where Nicaragua is on the map, and two, really be able to speak to some of the historical, social, political, movements. And yeah, it was just great. Sorry, we can end it there.
Who was this?
It was at work. He's like our maintenance guy.
I see.
Yeah, he's an old guy, old feller. No, I get it. I'm happily married.
No,
He literally just came out like, excuse me? I haven't heard of this guy. Yeah.
Who's Celestino there?
I know he's just but he is here for them.
Well, anyhow, this was a personable conversation. I'm very happy we had this. It was something a little lightweight, folks. If you didn't like it, you don't have to listen. I don't know what you're doing here. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to know more, which people, if anyone has questions, they can always send us comments and reach out. Yeah. All right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. Thank you, Kimita, for joining me with that light conversation. I really enjoyed it. Here we go.
Next time we should do this with wine.
Yeah. I was a little elevated on wine.
Oh, I can't. Wait, no. Wait. Who are you? Like, what are you talking about?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I was like, wine.
All right, here we go. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where we found this episode or on our blog at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you have heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on the Spotify, iTunes podcast, Bitchute, Odysee, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes where we found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about what you heard us cover, contact us to our blog. Andy will answer you on our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Gema Sotomayor. Gema Aburto Sotomayor. Before Jorge strangles me.
Before Jorge picks up his ear again.
Hi, Jorgito, chismosito. You can find my social media handle as @Don Eduardo Barca on Instagram. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you all next time for the next episode. Thank you very much. Ciao.
Bye.